You are listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 172. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to this week's podcast episode. I'm thrilled to have you here and thrilled to have you join us for this wonderful episode with Adriana and Allison Wolf. We are going to be talking about all things time management for lawyers. They are going to share their insights on common challenges for lawyers, advice that works and advice that doesn't work, as well as what to avoid when it comes to time management. Now, I'm going to introduce each of Adriana and Allison, and then we'll dive into the questions. Now, both Allison and Adriana are return guests to the podcast, so this might not be the first time you're hearing from them, but if it is the first time, here's some information about each of them. Now, Adriana Paris is joining us from Tampa, Florida. She was in a previous episode of the podcast all about navigating your first year at a law firm. And so if you are in your first year or early stage of your practice, I encourage you to go back and check out that episode where you'll hear from Adriana. She is the author of a book called Rising Lawyer, which is all about that first year in your legal practice. And she's about to produce another book called The Chill Lawyer. She coaches lawyers in areas of productivity and career transition, where career transition can be looked at from the perspective of going from job A to job B, or from the perspective of redesigning the job that you currently have. She is also the Director of Professional Development and Legal Recruiting at Rissmann Law, where she oversees the hiring, training, and retention of over 100 lawyers. Adriana, welcome back to the podcast, and thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you again.
Wonderful. And Allison Wolf is joining us from Victoria, British Columbia. She is a very senior lawyer coach. She has been coaching lawyers for more than 20 years. She is also a returning guest on the podcast. She joined us almost 2 years ago to talk about partnership and whether it's for you. It is an episode all about making that decision of whether or not it is the right track for you. And what I love when I was thinking about today's podcast episode is that we've got Adriana's podcast episode where it's looking at the beginning of your practice. And then we've got Allison's episode, which is more mid to more senior career where you're making different decisions. Going back to Allison, she is the founder of The Lawyer Coach, and she leads a team of lawyer coaches. And she and her team coach lawyers at all levels, from the junior level to the mid-career level, all the way to senior lawyers and founders. Allison is also the founder of the AMP program, Associate Mentoring Plus, and that is a program that is designed to help junior lawyers who are just starting out through group coaching and through training. It is now offered through the Continuing Legal Education of British Columbia, and it's a wonderful program. I coach in that program, and it's a wonderful support for lawyers. Now, before we move on, just want to make sure, Adriana, did I miss anything in the introduction?
Nope, you got it all.
Amazing. And Allison, is there anything that I missed?
Well, you didn't miss anything, but if I could interject with something I'm pretty excited about. The AMP program, I'm so happy you mentioned that, has been a wonderful learning experience for me. I'm sure for you too. I think we've had some good conversations about it. And it really inspired something in me, which I want to just tell people about. When I launched AMP and in those first years, senior lawyers would say to me, I wish I'd had something like this when I was starting out. And I realized that there was a segment of my client base that really needed that something special. And it wasn't, in this case, the juniors, but it was the founders of small and mid-sized growing firms. It's funny, but there's a lot of focus on legal marketing and how do you get clients. I think the real challenge is what do you do when the clients arrive? For these small firms, they don't have the resources. They don't have that big admin team. And so for a lot of these founders, they find themselves drowning in administrative work and tasks. And it can be really tough in those days of growing their firms. So I've started the Flourishing Law Center. It's going to launch in Q4. I'm just getting the last pieces in place. And I'm really excited to be offering this to those founders. And it's funny that we're talking about time management because, of course, it's kind of a program that's launching out of the fact that these are folks who have got so much good stuff happening in their firms, but they're just struggling to get to it and all of it. So yeah, I wanted to share that with you.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, Allison. And as you know, I'm a huge fan of all things community, especially when it comes to helping lawyers support each other. And when you can find clusters of people who have similar challenges and opportunities, it's great to share experiences. And as you mentioned, that time management does come in. When you have all these great opportunities, how do you decide what to focus on, what to do first, which is why I'm so thrilled that you and Adriana are here to help our lawyers to navigate some of these challenges. So we're going to start off. And Allison, I'm going to turn to you first to ask you how you define time management.
Okay, so time management, if we're really strictly talking about the term in a very technical sense, is the ability to use one's time effectively, productively. It involves setting goals, prioritizing, and then thinking about how much time you want to give to each task with a goal of sort of really upping your productivity and efficiency. The challenge is that in a lot of circles, time management as this discipline has really fallen out of favor. And because we've really learned over time, there's way more at work here. So I like to think about, in the legal context, practice management, because practice management, I find, makes a lot more space for so much that's important that can be missed with a narrow time management focus. And I think today, I know that Adriana and I are going to be talking about the expanded definition of time management. So I think practice management involves all the things we talked about with time management, but then also touches on the internal thoughts, rhythms, attention that drives us, our systems and our scaffolds that help support us in, carrying out our intentions, and then respect for the physical bodies that we show up each day to work with. That's my thoughts on it.
Love that. Thank you so much, Allison. And time management, I use that almost as a placeholder, right? It's words that people recognize and they understand the category of what we're talking about. And as you've just described, time management is so much more than just that management of time. Adriana, would love to hear your personal definition of time management.
Yeah, just to kind of pick up on Allison's, I love that practice management is amazing. I think of time management as attention management, because time just is what it is. And as much as we like to look at other people and think they have more time than we do, that's infactual. We all have the same amount of time. So for me, it's all about, where do you want to drive your attention? What are the things that are important to you that you want to fill up the same time that we all have that you want to fill that up with? So that's kind of the way I think about it.
I love that. So we've got practice management, we've got attention management, and Allison, you look like you have something to add.
I just wanted to pick up on what you said, Adriana, because I 100% agree with you on attention and time being this fixed thing. But don't you find it so interesting how an hour can be so many things? Like an hour can take forever, or an hour can be like, what happened? Like that just went by so quick. It's amazing. Yeah. It's like this bag that you can only fit a few things into, or you can stuff 100 things into. It's so interesting.
Totally.
This is the reason why I'm so thrilled that you're both here today, because we're all so excited. The heads are nodding and it's all about time, which leads so nicely to the next question. And Adriana, I'm going to start with you. And you're writing a whole book about the chill lawyer, and you've written many posts on LinkedIn. We've had discussions about productivity. What is your connection to lawyers and time management or attention management, however you want to describe it?
Yeah, for me, it's all personal experience. I was a lawyer who did not know how to manage her attention, her practice. I had zero intentionality to my days. I basically showed up, and whatever I was asked to do, I just said yes. And the bag that Allison was mentioning had a giant hole in it because I just kept fitting stuff in, but then stuff kept falling out, right? So it was never a bag full of things that I wanted. It was just like just a bunch of mess. And it took me many years of kind of stopping and asking myself, like, okay, what should I actually focus on? Even though this person is telling me I should do this, why? Like, why am I doing it just because someone is asking me to do it? And it's been a long journey for me, but it's been something that has completely transformed my life, my career, my health, my complete happiness. Like everything has been affected by this kind of one small thing, but actually huge impact, deciding every day what I want to do and how I want to go about it. And now working with lawyers, I see that this is one of their biggest obstacles in anything, whether they want to stay lawyers and make partner and be rainmakers, whether they want to leave everything behind and become painters, it doesn't matter. If you don't know how to use your only resource that is finite, which is time, then you won't get to any of your goals. So I'm just really passionate about making sure that people understand that everything starts with small things, like how do you run your day? And then it goes to bigger things, like how do you make this huge transition or take the next step or get the partnership or whatever you're looking for.
I love that. And the piece that really sticks out and resonates with me is that intentionality. And I relate exactly to what you're describing, right? As a junior lawyer and just responding and reacting to all the things that came my way, as opposed to now where it's kind of the opposite, where I'm much more disciplined and intentional about how to use, as you said, time is the great equalizer. We have the same number of hours each day and we have more choice. I think lawyers probably have more choice in how they use those hours than they fully appreciate. So love that. Allison, would love to hear how it is that you became so interested in this area of time management.
So yeah, there's two different elements and they mirror Adriana's. The first is that I'm not a naturally organized person. I'm not a naturally ordered person. It's not something that I just, came out of the womb with. It wasn't a strength. And so I was that kid in university who stayed up all night writing the final paper or cramming for the exam. And I just was a hard worker. And I was able to do well. And I was able to make that work for a period of time. But as I had more and more responsibility and more things happening in life, the wheels started to quickly come off that bus. And I had to get interested in how can I do this better? And I think because it was a weakness, it's something that I became really interested in and discovered that I really enjoy. And I enjoy looking for ways to better this and continually better it. I think what's really interesting, Adriana, about where you started and where I start, I think that we can bring a lot of compassion and understanding to clients who come to us with these challenges because we have them too. And here's the thing about me. I don't have perfect systems and processes. They are falling off the table all the time because, again, it's not how I'm hardwired. But I've learned one important rule. Pick them up as quick as you can. Oh, it dropped off. Pick it up again. Pick it up again. Pick it up again. Because when it's in place, everything works so much better. So that's one piece. The other piece is I'm going to get a little crazy here, but the truth and the heart of a lot of what I do is I'm passionate about the rule of law. I spent 8 years of my life living in China. I know what it looks like to live in a country without the rule of law, or with a very different rule of law, perhaps we could say. And it makes me very unhappy that the very people we depend on in our society to make this work are burning out in huge numbers and are miserable and depressed. And it doesn't have to be this way. There's so much within all of our power, right, to shift this, to change this, and really influence it for the better. And so time management is really a very big piece of that. And exactly right, Adrian. We can't grow practices. We can't make big career changes. It's really hard to chase our dream when so much of our energy is like pouring out the bottom, right? So this is a lovely way of supporting ourselves in doing the good work, whatever we choose to do that work in. Yeah.
Excellent. So Allison, you and Adriana both talked about time management and how it's kind of internally developed, right? It started with you. And now each of you is working with lawyers to help them with time management. So how did that come to be? How did you shift from being interested for yourself for time management and then now doing that for lawyers and with lawyers? And Allison, if you'd like to go first.
I can start that because there's a natural starting point. Because I started as a coach 20 years ago, there was a very small market for lawyer coaching, let me tell you. It was pretty lean because there was so little awareness of what coaching was, right? And so the first thing that law firms and lawyers would invest in was business development coaching. And I have a background, I was the lead director of business development at firms. So, and here's the truth, you can't grow a practice if you don't have a solid practice management foundation, because it's like trying to float your boat and sail your boat while you're bailing water every day. You can't do it. And so very early on, I encountered that, right? We're not going to be able to sail this ship anywhere until we actually get the hull solid, which is that practice management foundation. And once that, other kinds of coaching and other areas of focus started to come on, there was always, for some people, this foundation that needed support. And now people come because they're seeking time management. They're seeking help with time management coaching more than anything, right? That's now a demand in and of itself. But in the earlier days, it came out of other work.
Yeah. And I always think it's important to acknowledge that you have been doing this from the stage where coaching wasn't a thing that people knew about. So thank you for being a pioneer. We appreciate it. Adriana.
Say one thing. There were some scary moments there. Very scary moments.
Adriana, would love to hear from you. What kind of prompted the transition from that internal desire to better manage your own time to then helping lawyers manage theirs?
Yeah.
Other lawyers,
Right. So I'm wired a little bit different from Allison in that I am naturally kind of a productive person. I think more efficient than other people. It's, I guess, just one of my superpowers. I've always been this way. I always get assignments in early. I never pull all-nighters. It's just me. And for a long time, I was like, this is just me. This is just how I am. And all my friends who were lawyers would notice that about me. And they'd be like, you're so lucky. That's just how you are. And it took me a little while to realize that, yes, it's me, but I use a lot of processes to help me be this way. And I can teach that to other people. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to transform you from somebody who's always behind to somebody who's always early. But there's a lot of improvement we can make with just some things, some tools that I can teach you that I use myself. It's almost like somebody who, let's say, is naturally, you think they're fit, right? You're like, oh, this person's just in shape. Well, it turns out they work out every single day and they eat healthy. So the two things are very much one kind of starts the other, but then one cannot happen without the other. So that's really what started it with me, is my friends just saying oh, you're just naturally this way. There's no way I could ever be like you. It was almost like a little challenge for myself. Okay, well, let me show you what I do and give you some tips. And maybe you can implement some of these and see how they work for you. And it worked. I have legitimately helped people who say that they're procrastinators, that they never get anything done, they never accomplish things, to actually turning that around and accomplishing things. And they might not do it 100% of the time, but they do it 70% of the time, which is much better. So that has been kind of my, my transition, I guess.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because I think sometimes we have strengths that we don't see because they come so naturally.
Totally.
But when someone else points that out in you, and then you give it that thought and reflection, and you start to identify the things that you're doing naturally or that you've learned somehow to, in your case, right, manage time, not procrastinate, submit assignments early, whatever it happens to be. Once you can break that down and teach that to other people, that is just such a gift for them, right? Now they can adopt, your naturally well-managed time practices, right? So Adriana, one of the things that I would love to hear from you is some of the challenges that you see lawyers face when it comes to time management.
Yeah, I think especially today, and this was not that much of a challenge when I started practicing, 12-ish years ago. I think social media has just completely grabbed our attention to a level that we're not even cognizant of. Some of the things I do with my clients is I ask them to track a week of their time before we start working together, just so we see kind of what they do. And a lot of times they don't want to put this on the track time, but we'll talk about it. And I'm like, so what do you do at night? Tell me how you wind down. And lo and behold, it comes out that they are spending hours on Instagram, on TikTok, whatever. And it's such a productivity and mood killer that I think it makes it so hard for people to get anything done, because they always have their phone right next to them always, and it just kind of steals their attention. And again, I don't think this was that big of an issue when I started practicing because it just wasn't so common to be scrolling on your phone all the time. And now it has become like the method of communication. Like I know people who say, "Oh, I talk to my friends all day long on Reels." I'm like, that's not talking. Like you guys are not talking. You're watching the same stuff and you're kind of like commenting about it, but that's not communicating really. So that I think is the biggest thing. And I don't have perfect solutions to avoid that. I do have some tips for people, but that is the number one thing. And then I think the number two thing is something that we have always struggled with as a profession, which is just too many competing demands and an inability or lack of awareness about what is more important. It seems like everything's important. So we feel completely like at someone else's beck and call. We just have to do everything those people ask of us. And we need to kind of start training the muscle of figuring out what is actually important and what isn't. Because everything seems important, but that just cannot be true.
Yeah, both really excellent points. Do you find that there's a generational theme, like in terms of the lawyers that you work with? Do you find that more junior lawyers are more interested in the social media, or do you find that's across the board? Just curious what your experience has been.
I do think, I don't know that they're more interested in it. I think they just are so used to it. I think social media is so much more prevalent in their days. Like they wake up and they look on their phones, and before they know it, it's been 45 minutes and they're like, "Oh, where has my morning gone?" Well, it literally has gone to your phone. Same at night. They can't fall asleep. They're like, "I have sleep problems." It's like, no, you were scrolling for 2 hours. Your brain is being completely hijacked by this nonsense information that you see on TikTok. And of course, you cannot fall asleep after seeing all this stuff. But people my age, millennials or whatever, like we use our phones a lot too. I struggled with a lot of social media usage during the pandemic specifically. But I think for the younger lawyers, I think it's just so prevalent and so common that they don't even realize that it's an issue.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly fall into the category of late night scrolling. I'm a Gen Xer nearing my 50s. And so I get it, right? I think, and I have children, a 12-year-old son who really likes his phone. So I get it. And I think maybe for generations that didn't grow up with the social media, they remember life before social media. Whereas if you've been in it your whole life,
it was amazing.
Yeah, it's a real thing, right? We're all learning our relationship with it. What about you, Allison? What are some of the common challenges that you see lawyers struggle with when it comes to time management?
Well, I think Adriana's really hit some important ones with the overwhelm and the distraction. I was thinking about this one, which is letting everyone else set the agenda. Right? That I no longer really control my day. I've let go of that control and I let other people run my day for me, be it because of the what's coming in through my email that they've decided they want to ask me for at a particular moment, because of interruptions of people coming into my office or popping onto my Teams chat. But basically, I've relinquished control of my day. And that's one of them. And the other one related to it, there's just little time for the deep work. And there's a component of legal work, and it's often the work that's most satisfying to lawyers, which is the deep work. And with control relinquished for the day, there's no longer time for that deep work. And then finally, I'd say for more senior lawyers, there can be controlling behaviors that add to the overwhelm and add to the sheer volume of stuff that's coming through. And one of those can be holding on to stuff and not delegating. And the other one can be having to be on every single email is another real interesting one that comes up. Like I need to see everything. And you can just imagine in a busy lawyer's practice what that starts to look like in their inbox.
Yeah, those are such great examples. We know lawyers are generally really smart, high achieving. They know how to figure things out. And yet this time management struggle seems to linger. And lawyers are looking to advice, right? And they look for these tips and tricks and find that they don't really solve the problem. So, Allison, I'd love your perspective on some of the time management hacks or tips or tricks that you see they're not helping lawyers. They're almost failing lawyers.
For this, I really wanted to just say that I do not think there's a one size fits all. When it comes to practice management, it's really personal. And there's we can talk about high level concepts, but when we get into like actual strategies and what's going to be their system and process, their scaffolding, it gets really personal. So the mistake can be, okay, look at person A. I'm just going to try and do it exactly like them because it may not work. And here's one example. Some people are really techie. They're going to love their Trello boards, right? Mm-hmm. Fabulous. Another person, when it's on the Trello board, it is out of sight, out of mind. Doesn't work at all, right? There's pen and paper people out there. And you have to really understand, who am I in this? What's going to work for me? The concept of capturing tasks, capturing all this information and creating your second brain system. Yes, that's the universal truth. You need your second brain system. But what form that takes, that's going to be where we get into the personalization, customization.
Just to jump in, I totally agree with Allison. People ask me this all the time. They're like, tell us the best tips that we can do right now and we'll do them. And I always say the best productivity tip is the one that you're going to stick with and actually implement. And that's true for like anything in life. Like talk about habit forming of any sort. The best habits, the best routines are the ones that you're going to actually stick with, right? It could work for me 100% of the time and be the best thing I've ever discovered in my life. But if you're not going to do it, it doesn't matter how good it is for me. And like one kind of common thing that I think a lot of people talk in the quote unquote productivity circles is you have to wake up at 3:30 in the morning and get all your shit done before the day starts. Otherwise, like you will never succeed. And that's such nonsense because not everyone's a morning person. That is like scientifically proven. There are people who would rather die than do anything at 4 a.m. So again, it doesn't matter that works for some people. Like you will never implement that ever, ever, ever if you're not a morning person. And why would you make yourself do that? If you're a night owl, stay up till midnight. If that's when your best ideas come through and that's when you're the most productive, take advantage of that and then sleep in a little bit in the morning and just roll out of bed and go to work all groggy. If that's what works for you, then that's what you should do. Don't force yourself to wake up at 4 a.m. just because that's what, I don't know, Elon Musk does or whoever.
I love that you mentioned that because I've discovered that the legal community has a lot of night owls in it.
Yes, they do. And they should, because if you have client demands at all hours of the day, you need some people who are okay working at 8 p.m. I'm not that person. Don't call me past 7. I'm not answering the phone. However, I will be the person who will reply to your email at 7 a.m. because that's me. So like together we can basically make a 24/7 lawyer service, but it can't be one person who does it all. Right.
Which is the current broken model. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I love this. And for the benefit of those who are listening, the heads are nodding. You can't see.
We are agreeing with everything.
We're all nodding. We're all in agreement. So it sounds like that one failing piece of advice is that there is one single way, right? If someone is saying this is the way to do it, this is the Trello board, or you got to get up at 3, or you have to stay up all night, whatever it is, it's really up to the individual. Turning it around, and maybe Adriana, will start with you. Again, with the understanding that everybody is different, what time management advice do you see actually working for lawyers?
Yeah. The two things that I have found most helpful across the board, and again, there's customization with each one, depending on how you work. But the number one thing is to not read and respond emails the second they come in. You have to try to find a designated time for email, just like you do everything else. Like if you're a lawyer who works on a lot of motion practice, you don't just like write motions at random times of the day or all throughout the day. You kind of pick a time where you're like, all right, I have to sit down and focus. And I think emails should be the same. There's absolutely no reason in the world why you would just sit at your computer waiting for emails to come through and then rapidly respond and then send another email and then do it again the second another email comes through. Email communication is not effective ever. It doesn't resolve problems ever. It creates more issues. And so if you can just delegate reading and responding to emails to certain times of the day, your productivity and your brain just like expands because you're not dealing with this like back and forth email. And again, you can choose. Yeah, please go ahead.
I was just going to link that to what Allison said before, and I'm so sorry to interrupt, but when Allison was talking about one of the challenges that lawyers are not controlling their own time, right? They're responding. It's as though other people own their time. I think email is one of those ways that people 100%. Own your time without you actually really consciously consenting to that. You see them in your inbox and then you respond. So I love that. Thank you so much, Adriana.
Yeah.
And I apologize for interrupting, but I really wanted to throw
but
that
you're
in.
exactly correct. Like if you just practice this mentality of I have to respond to an email anytime it comes in, you're essentially giving up your time to someone else who has said, I'm going to send an email now because I want to, without actually expecting me to respond right away. But we think that that's actually what they mean. And again, you can customize how you apply this. I might say, I'm going to read all my emails at 8 a.m. and then I'm going to wait 3 hours before looking at them again. Some lawyers might say that's impossible. I need to read emails every hour. That's fine. As long as you just kind of set those times for yourself and you're not constantly reading emails. And then the second thing that is related really to this email suggestion is to try to time block your days as much as you can. And I know it's really hard, especially if you're a more junior associate who feels like, again, they don't have any autonomy. People are just constantly telling what to do. And that's really not true because you still have autonomy in how you use your judgment as a lawyer to decide when you're going to work on certain things. And again, if you're a morning person and you get to the office and you have a ton of energy, block that morning to do really high important stuff, like stuff that requires your attention, and then leave some of the more administrative stuff, billing, like time entry, things like that, to the afternoon when your energy is a little bit slumped down. Versus if you kind of have a slow start to your morning, then give yourself that time to do some of the easier tasks. And in the afternoon, when you have a ton of energy, like really focus on important projects. But again, learning and deciding how you're going to spend your day and trying to have it kind of in blocks makes a huge difference in everyone's day. And again, you can decide how you do it, but the concept itself, I think, is applicable to anybody.
Excellent suggestions. Allison, we'd love to hear from you. What are some of the strategies that you find are generally effective with the lawyers that you work with?
So Adriana has really covered some very important points, which is I'm so grateful for. They're excellent. And I'll add a few. I'll add 3. 2 of them are multi-purpose for everyone. And one of them may be more challenging for junior lawyers. So the first one, I'm going to talk about the weekly meeting with yourself. I think it's great if you can take time out once a week, and you can do it anytime you want. And some people actually like doing it Sunday night because it can help actually reduce the stress of what's coming during the week. And the idea here is that you take a look at your second brain system, which you have developed, which will be, your projects, your file list, what's on the go, what are some of the big things that are coming up, what do you want to get started sooner? I have a little sheet that I hand out for this weekly meeting, but which has lots of little questions you can ask yourself. Is there something I can give to my assistant to do? Is there someone I need to communicate with? Where am I procrastinating? Where can I get started? What do I want to get started? Where do I want to complete? But this weekly meeting gives you a bit of a game plan. And this kind of ties in with Adriana's time blocking strategy, right? But having that game plan is really helpful. And here's what I tell people. Look, yes, you're going to come if you're a litigator, if you're a solicitor, you're going to come into the office. And by Tuesday, the game plan is going to be looking a lot different. That's okay. The main thing is you had a game plan. And now you're moving and shifting and with it, but you knew what your priorities were, you know what they are, and you know where things fit. So it's a very important habit to go up to the high level, take a look at the landscape, make some decisions, and then get back down into the action. That's the weekly meeting. On another note, the second one is run a dash. I'm crazy about run a dash. And maybe it's because I use it all the time. Run a dash is understanding the power of 10 or 15 minutes. We get lots of these little tiny bite sizes of time in our day. It may be, I finished this. I've got a meeting at noon. I've got 10 minutes. Instead of scrolling through social media or checking
I was just going to say, that's what people do.
Same thing.
Go to that list and knock something out, right? And it can be, you may have decided, okay, so here's one. Personal injury lawyer has these medical reports that he's got to go through. They tend to pile up. He started using his run a dash for just attacking some of those and quickly found within a week or 2 that he had now got it down to, so there's just a small daily pile. And using the run a dash strategy, he was able to just get through it on a regular basis without really changing the amount he was getting done in other areas. You can use run a dash for actually tidying your office. Again, I had somebody who always lived in chaos. She started using Run a Dash for putting some order into her office, and pretty soon the decks were clear. But Run a Dash can also be used for taking a look at opening the file that you haven't looked at yet and just scanning through it and getting a sense of what your next step might be. So it's a very, very powerful tool that you have that little time. I write articles in 15-minute increments. The first 15 is going to be, okay, what the heck am I going to write about, right? Finding that topic and then just doing some quick writing and then returning to it. And next thing you know, it's done. So Run a Dash. The third point, and this one is tricky for juniors, but it's so important, controlling volume. And law firms are killers for this because there's this sense that we've got to take it all and do it all. Munch, 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 bring it in. Let's have the fire hose. And it doesn't actually accept the fact that there are limits to our human capacity. I think it has its roots in scarcity mindset. Oh my gosh, the economy could tank tomorrow. There won't be enough work. So we have to do triple the work today, right? And it really, if there's one thing that's a fast track to burnout, it's the yes, 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 which, Adriana, you referenced at the beginning of your, yeah, right? And so you really have to control volume. And it's tricky. But for partners and leaders of law firms, we have a lot of conversations about what that looks like. Who are ideal clients? What's the work we want to do? What's the work that engages us? What's the stuff that drags us down and really sucks the energy out of us, right? And getting that stuff out of the practice. For juniors, it can be tricky because you might have 5, 6 lawyers sending you work, and they don't know what the other person is sending to you. And so you end up with this huge, like, nightmarish load, and you cannot possibly deliver. And that's where, you have to learn skills, some of those conversational skills and communication skills for talking with partners about what you can and can't do, because there are real limits. And when you try and break through those limits, it's a disaster.
I just recently, sorry to interrupt too, but I recently talked to some of our associates about how to set boundaries, because I was at the National Association of Women Lawyers conference a couple of months ago, and the age differences in everybody there are vast. And so I was talking to some very senior, like chief legal officers and partners of firms, and I was talking to some very junior associates. And the discussion was, a lot of the more seasoned attorneys believe that the junior attorneys are just not wanting to work. They're saying they're too busy all the time. They're constantly saying no, and they're always like pushing their boundaries, and they just don't understand how to work with it. And something I was talking to the associates about is, look, everybody has boundaries, everybody has limits. It's just a fact of life. And the legal profession will constantly try to push those boundaries for you. And one way that you can try to set some boundaries in a way that doesn't annoy partners is by explaining. So instead of saying, I'm busy, I'm not taking on this project because I don't feel like it, which is how a lot of them come off these days, write an email and make it explanatory, right? Say what you have going on, list out all the projects you're working on, list the partners that you're working with and the deadlines that they have told you are imperative, and say, here's what I have going on. And the reason I cannot take a project and do it to the best of my abilities because I have all these things going on. Now, sometimes the partners will intervene and say, oh, I'll talk to them. My project's more important. You're going to work for me. Other times they'll just say, okay, but I get it. You do have a lot going on. I can see from this list. So I'll just leave you alone, or I'll try to work with you at a different time. But I think, again, it's important to learn how to communicate, like Allison was saying, and verbalize the things that you have going on and be detailed. And I've said this to associates, I'm like, I know it takes longer than 10 minutes to write a well thought out email, and you guys are not used to this because you want everything to be fast, 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 but it's going to save you a lot of heartache in the future if you just learn how to verbalize and write down and be detailed about all the projects you have going on. And then people will respect that versus you just saying, I'm busy, no thank you. And then they get very annoyed at that comment. So that was just a little aside that it reminded me of as Allison was talking about her suggestions.
I think it's wonderful how all of this is weaving together, right? Allison, you were talking about that weekly meeting with yourself. If you've done that weekly meeting with yourself and you understand what your deliverables are for that week, and then the request comes in from the partner, and Adriana, you want to then articulate to the partner, here's exactly what's going on. You start to see how the practices, they build on each other. Another thing that I wanted to just circle back to that Allison was talking about with that weekly meeting with yourself is that also addresses the intentionality that Adriana, you brought up at the beginning, right? That the difference between your early stages of practice, as you described it, right? Where it just felt like things were coming at you, and the way that you now are more intentional about your time. I think when we're actually sitting down every week, and whether it's writing out or a list on a document on our computer, whatever it is, when we are raising our awareness about what we're putting on our to-do list, then we start to question it. We start to see where we're spending our time, where we might be losing our time. So these are all such wonderful suggestions. Allison, you have your hand up.
I wanted to just build on something that Adriana had said just about working with the juniors and the wonderful advice that you just provided on how to communicate, how to have these conversations about capacity. I wanted to add at the beginning, when you're a junior in your first year, choose carefully. It's great to start out as a yes person. I'll tell you why. What happens is you get brains have shortcuts. Our brains are automatic shortcut systems, right? So we stamp people like with basically, this is who this person is. This is what I think about them. And we get this idea in our head. And once we get that idea and that picture, it's really hard to shake it. So if you can come in and start at a firm and really be a yes person as much as you possibly can, wisely, right? And maybe you're going to have to give up some events or things that are important to you just at the beginning. What you're doing to establish is that you're a yes person who does things, goes the extra mile, a super keener. Then you switch gears. And you tactically, when you need to, you say no. But you have established that you're a yes person. So when a yes person says no, oh my gosh, it must be real. It was just like when I was a kid in high school and I always went to all my classes and I never cut classes. And in my final year, I cut the odd class. Nobody ever believed that's what I was doing because they all knew I was such a good student. So you think carefully about your brand as you come into a firm and then use that to your advantage.
Seriously, these are excellent tips. Thank you. Next question. And Allison, I'll start with you. In your own practice, what are some of your favorite go-tos when it comes to time management?
I have 5 things, and I won't go into great detail because I know time is of the essence. I meet with my assistant once a week.
Time is of the essence, yes. Go on.
Yes. So I meet with my assistant once a week and it's a 1-hour meeting and we get really into it. And inevitably in that meeting, something that was falling off the table comes back on the table because she's got her eyes on different things. It's a really good meeting. So my meeting with myself is actually with my assistant and it's very powerful and it's a very valuable hour. Daily to-do lists are great. Like just knowing, hey, what are my priorities for today? What are the things that absolutely can't drop off? Are important. And also there's that saying, what gets scheduled gets done. I have a robust practice management system software that is essential to the practice. It stores crucial information. It integrates with billing. Like the software is essential. The practice wouldn't work without it. I have an ability to embrace imperfection. It has to be. In my eyesight, I'm 58, so I'm reading glasses time. So sometimes there'll be typos in the emails or I'm trying to get something out quickly. You know what? It's imperfect. That's okay. The message is getting across. It's all right, right? And finally, picking up what I said earlier, when I drop pieces of my organization system, which happens regularly, I pick them back up as fast as I can and get back on track.
Amazing. Love, love, love that list. Adriana, how about you? What are some of your go-tos for your own practice?
Yeah. So every morning I write a 3-item daily to-do list. I'm a big fan of choosing just 3 things that are really important to get accomplished that day. And I almost always get them done. And if then I have extra time, then I do other stuff. But if that's all I get done, that's all I get done. And I'm happy with that. And I do that every morning. I try to do it before I even open my email because, again, I don't want the email to hijack my day. I want to choose what to work on versus other people choosing for me. And then every Friday afternoon, I plan for the week ahead. So I'm big on making weekly plans. I also make my grocery list that on Friday. I do a lot of like live things on Friday. And because of that, I try to never schedule meetings on Friday unless it's like a podcast interview or something that's more fun. But I try not to schedule like serious meetings on Friday.
This is a serious meeting.
This is a serious meeting. This is true.
It's not Friday, but it's a serious meeting.
This is true. Yeah. I was thinking about tomorrow because I do have a meeting tomorrow, but it's more like a fun thing. And I'm a big fan of batching my days just because I feel like it really works for me. So I try not to have interviews or meetings in the morning. I try to save those for the afternoon because I get energy from talking to people and I'm usually very tired in the afternoon. So that kind of picks me up. I'm very productive in the morning. I'm the person who is a morning person. And so I get a lot done. And I find that it's best if I just don't let other people interfere with my mornings.
Beautiful. Such great suggestions. Allison, you have had the benefit of coaching lawyers for 20 years now. So you have seen quite an evolution, right? In terms of how lawyers practice. And I imagine you've got many clients who you're working with or who you have been working with for quite a bit of time. And so what would you offer as something that helps lawyers succeed over the long term when it comes to managing their time?
There's so much that we've covered. I think that there's so much in what's already been talked about that really, if people are listening and taking notes, that really brings, I don't want to repeat a lot of what we've already said. What I would say is, if we're going to get to the heart of this, it's important for all of us to mindfully build up our own personal systems of routines and strategies that we're going to use that help us put our intentions into action. And it's going to take trial and error. There's things that are going to work and don't work, but mindfully determine what's that foundation that I'm going to build to support my legal practice and then support my personal life as well. Like you've heard from Adriana and I about what our go-tos are. We've learned what really works for us. For Adriana, the list of 3 things, really powerful, right? So you need to find what that is for you, because once you get that nice and stable, you can start to build on that. And what I say is that this is something where you get that solid foundation, those go-tos that are yours, that work for you, and then never stop tinkering. Adopt a get better mindset. This is something where you're always going to be wanting to tighten the bolts and the screws. You're going to be wanting to bring new pieces in, right? Really always adopt that get better mindset, and that will help you, continuously renew and improve your systems.
Love that. You mentioned at the beginning as well, Allison, this idea of kind of falling off the wagon and then getting back on, right? Our systems are going to fail us at some point or another. And so the trick is bringing yourself back onto the right path. Any suggestions on how you can do that?
It's an interesting one. So, if I'm in coaching conversations, if I'm working with someone one-on-one, that is definitely something that we're talking about. And it's a practice. Right? It's a practice. If you're doing the weekly meeting with yourself and you're kind of scheduling that, the practice it's a noticing practice. Notice, how am I keeping this up? What's working? I notice I'm starting to flail. I notice I'm overwhelmed. I notice I'm in the weeds. All right. What's not happening? What am I not doing that I was doing before? Right? It's funny, but one of the first questions I'll ask in a practice management conversation is, well, what has worked for you in the past? Like, let's go and find what has been a part of your scaffolding in the past that's worked, because there's often a lot of really good intel and information in that, right? So it is a noticing practice, an awareness practice, and literally overwhelm and starting to worry about things dropping off. That is a signal. It's the signal to check the system. It's the signal to get back in place.
I love that.
So
and I think
recognizing that.
Yeah. And I think for everybody listening, just knowing that you can expect that, right? That it's not a one and done, we create a system and it's forever perfect. It's that there are going to be hiccups, and part of the process then is learning how to pick yourself back up.
It's very important.
Thank you. Adriana, one of the things that you seem to be really great at doing, and that you talk about quite a bit in your LinkedIn posts, is this idea of being discerning about what is on your list and what isn't. And one of the challenges we've talked about today is that idea that everything is important. Everybody wants something from you, and that it's really hard sometimes to decide what you say yes to and what you say no to. So I would love it if you could help us with some tips on how to decide what to keep on our plates and what to take off of them.
Yeah, you must have been reading my LinkedIn, because I just wrote about this, I think yesterday, although I do talk about it quite a bit. But I think yesterday I said something like, urgent is not always important, and important things are not always urgent. And I also suggested that one question you could ask yourself is, who is this urgent to, or who is this important to, or who is benefiting from this? And this is a question that I have this with lawyers, again, who are like, I have to do this, I have to do that. And they give me a laundry list of 20 things they have to do. And I'll say, okay, let's say you do this thing. Who is benefiting from it? And oftentimes it's not them. It's their boss or their partner or, some other random person who they don't really know, like society, But I think asking yourself the question, what am I getting out of this thing that I have convince myself I have to do. Oftentimes that will be your answer. If you're not getting anything out of it or you don't see an immediate benefit to you personally, then drop it, And it's easier to do it with things that are a little bit in advance. So I have a client I'm working with right now who she knows she's overcommitted socially. Like she's just said that to me. And she gave me a list of all the things she has coming up until the end of the year. And I was like, okay, well, you can't drop the thing you've already said you would do next week, right? That would make you a flake. You don't want to be that. I know from all of your commitments, that's very important to you. You don't want to be a flake. But what about the thing that you've committed to that's 4 months from now? What stops you from looking at your schedule and saying, you know what, I really just can't devote my attention to this. I have to get out of it. And guess what? She went ahead and emailed the organizer for that event and said, I have overcommitted. I'm sorry, I cannot do this. Please accept my apologies. And the person was like, okay, that's fine. And she was like, I felt so guilty for like a minute, but then I felt so relieved. I'm like, exactly. That's kind of the whole practice, is just taking a look of all the things you said you have to do and then asking yourself, like, who's benefiting from each thing? And then if you find things that you are not directly benefiting from, then how can you get out of them? And it's okay to get out of them. You don't have to stick to every single thing you've said you're going to do. That would be crazy. Why would we do that to ourselves?
Yeah, that's such a great suggestion. And, I think what holds us back so often is, much like you described with your client, that fear that somebody will be disappointed or they're going to be upset. And more often than not, you're going to be okay, right? The organizers of the event have lots of time. They can find somebody else. And so it's sitting down, doing that inventory and making conscious decisions again, right? Going back to that notion of intentionality. I love that. And this has been so amazing having both of you here. You've shared so many amazing strategies and tips and suggestions. And I just wanted to thank you both for joining us. I wanted to thank everybody who's listening for joining us. Before we wrap up, I would love to hear from each of you in terms of where lawyers can find you and the kind of work that you're doing with lawyers, and also anything that we didn't cover today, right? Anything that you'd like to add before we wrap up today. So maybe Allison, I'll start with you. Where can we find you? How do lawyers work with you? And is there anything else that you'd like to share before we sign off?
Oh, I want to share that I've enjoyed this a great deal. Adriana, it's been an absolute pleasure hearing your ideas and contributions. And I love what you're doing. And it's just, it's great that you're doing the work that you are, because gosh knows, I know that people really need this support and help. And yeah, I'm delighted that you're there offering this. And Paula, thank you so much for bringing us both together. It's been a great experience to have this conversation. It's fun to talk shop with people that are passionate about the same things and nerd out on it, really. I'm pretty easy to find. It's thelawyercoach.com. Little sneaky woman that I am, because I was one of the early people. I got that URL and I hold on to it.
Never give it up.
Never give it up. Thelawyercoach.com. And yeah, you can find me there. I'm on LinkedIn under The Lawyer Coach on LinkedIn. So pretty easy to find. And if you are a founder of a firm and feeling overwhelmed, watch that space, because in Q4, I'll be announcing the Flourishing Law Center, which is going to be doing something a little different than what is currently on offer by various other programs.
Beautiful. Amazing. And thank you again, Allison. It's such a pleasure to have you, and Adriana as well, and to introduce you to each other. I think, there were a lot of heads nodding as I mentioned. Adriana, how about you? We would love to know how lawyers can work with you, where they can find you, and if there's anything that maybe we didn't cover today that you'd like to add before we wrap up.
Yeah. Well, just to say, obviously, it goes without saying, but I've had so much fun talking to you guys. I love that we're all kind of in the same headspace when it comes to some of these productivity ideas. So as I mentioned, I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can just search for my name, Adriana Paris. I have a website, adrianaparis.com, easy to find. And I guess if I just had one last kind of tip for everybody is, and I love saying this and I say it to people a lot, is be an active participant in your own life, right? So many people just kind of like flounder around, waiting for other people to make decisions for them and choosing how they're going to do things and why they should do things. And I just like to remind people, like, this is your own one and only life. And so actively participate in it, make decisions, make commitments, stick with things, and choose your own way in life, because you only get to live it once. So
love that. So inspired. And Allison, you have something else to add?
Just an idea. I would love to do another podcast with you with Adriana about being an active participant in your life.
Yes.
I think we all would love to do that. That sounds like a fabulous idea. I love it. Love it. Love it. Thank you again, both of you, for joining us today. Thank you to everybody who's listening. I think what we've taken from this is, yes, time management does have that element of tips and tricks and calendars and meetings and everything. But at the heart of it, it's a mechanism to help you live the fullest life that you can, right? Choosing activities that you want to engage in and reaching your goals, your dreams, using your time in the way that, best suits you. I think the active participant in your life, right? You're using your time to create that. So thank you again, everybody. It's been such a pleasure, and I'll look forward to reconnecting again soon. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.